should women bring to the table? I think a big thing is peace. A lot of men, we go out into the world, especially if you're chasing after like a really successful guy. You know, a lot of men have stressful lives. We don't want our girlfriend to add to that stress. So I think it's a very common complaint you hear from men of like girlfriends nagging, girlfriends never being satisfied with whatever the situation is. So I think one of the biggest things you can bring is peace to a relationship.
Okay, follow up then.
Sure.
What should a woman do to address a real problem in the relationship without disturbing the peace?
Well, one, I would say, but men can also do this too, but sometimes you can jump the gun on an issue, and sometimes I do think taking time to meditate on something and thinking about, is this really an issue? Is this really going to bother me in 2 or 3 days?
Let's take for granted that it is an issue.
Sure. Okay. Well, I mean, my first line of advice would be meditate on a potential major issue for a little bit of time. Sometimes people like immediately want to, at the slightest grievance, want to start an argument. And I say, sometimes it's best to just pull back, be like, is this really worth arguing about? Am I really upset about this? So I think taking a bit of time first, but what would be an example of a legitimate issue that a woman encounters that she would bring to her boyfriend or partner or whatever?
Well, I guess the context of whether or not they're married definitely matters here.
Okay.
You expect different things of a husband than of a fiance or of a boyfriend.
Sure.
What if it's the infamous, female friends issue? What if she thinks it's inappropriate for him to hang out with female friends one-on-one, and he seemingly sees no issue with it? How does she bring this up with him without disturbing the peace of their relationship that men value so much? Because to me, what it sounds like is you're just saying, if you try to address any problem in a relationship with a guy, you're disturbing the peace, so you're not adding value.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said.
But I want to know.
Sure. Certainly there are legitimate things that could come up in a relationship that are genuine concerns, and those certainly ought to be discussed and talked about, and hopefully both partners can come to an understanding and a resolution, whether that's one person having a better understanding, both people having a better understanding, or whether whichever side makes a compromise. I think that's fine. But I do think it is often the case, you don't often hear husbands complaining, you don't often hear wives complaining about their nagging husbands. You often hear husbands complaining about their nagging wives. Similarly, I mean, you're a Christian, right?
Yes.
Proverbs 21:19, it's better to live in the desert than with a quarrelsome and nagging wife. There's a reason that you typically hear this as a gendered thing where it's one side. I do think it happens to be the case that typically men generally, I think, tend to otherwise be satisfied with the status quo of a relationship, whereas I do think women tend to get bored. They tend to, there's little nitpicky things that, men can...
I think women are just passive. So I think in order to not get in a fight, if you're trying to tell them hey, this sucks or you're doing this wrong, women should try to not be just passive aggressive.
Disagree. Do you mean passive or passive aggressive?
Passive aggressive, kind of making little comments, letting things build up, and then you're
sure.
Okay, this is my breaking point. Well,
I think that when women are, I guess, okay, how do I put this? Women tend to grab for control in a relationship, and men make a mistake of being too passive in a relationship. Not just in a relationship, but in life. If you're not examining yourself and you're not trying to constantly become a more virtuous person, what that looks like for women is constantly wanting to control everything, and because that's not the natural posture of a woman's nature. And then for a man, that looks like being passive, letting things happen to you instead of taking action. So that's not the natural posture of what a man should be doing in his life. So it's sort of the opposite.
I mean, for example, I've had situations where, trying to think of an example, I've dated a girl and she got upset that I wasn't texting her as frequently as she would like. There's probably other examples I can think of, and then I just ignored it. And then 2 days later, she's like, oh, hey, sorry. I was just kind of being emotional. Like, I don't know why I was upset.
It's
I
good
think
that she was
good-
able to introspect, but a lot of people aren't able to do that.
I think a lot of women, when going about protecting your peace in a relationship, is to not go about it so aggressively, kind of like you said, is to take time and actually assess why it is a problem and why it's an issue with you and why it doesn't sit well with you. And just going about it very, very
Grid
calmly.
One Motorsports donated $100. Mary, if my wife asked me not to go out with the boys and made legit points, I would not go. It is simple respect. Men should be stoic, but we often fail at that with the women we love. Men must be the rock your anger crashes against but does no harm.
Or you could just get a peaceful fucking woman. They're like,
But sometimes there are correct reasons to be angry.
sure.
And
And
the
look,
higher the stakes get,
Yeah.
the more
Yeah.
likely it is to happen.
sure. I think that the thing, though, with peace is why it's so important is
Sometimes you run a really chaotic and stressful dating podcast, and you just need to go home and have a home-cooked meal and not have a woman nagging you. I get it.
right. And a quarrelsome woman is enough to upend your life, but and also, like, getting into a bit more of an extreme here, if you add mental illness into the picture,
Oh.
that could absolutely ruin your life. So, and perhaps it's like, in the same way that we say, well, loyalty and companionship, that's the bare minimum of a relationship. I also think it happens to be the case. The bare minimum of a relationship is you're not my recommendation to men is to not date women with severe mental illness.
Good idea.
So I'm talking bipolar, BPD, any cluster B personality disorders, APD, BPD, as I mentioned, HPD, NPD.
Nickelodeon donated $99. Men are tired of arguing with their wives until they have to accept their wives are right, whether they are or not. Women learn to accept that you're not always right. Take a time out and come back to the argument and decide, is it really worth it?
Nickelodeon. Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Into some valuable insights. Okay,
So, okay. I mean, again, I'm getting into some. I'm trying to think where I want to go with this.
did you want to list other things that women should bring to the table?
Other things they can bring to the
Other
table.
than peace.
I mean, peace is huge.
Yes, I'm
Peace
not
is
saying it's
very
not. I'm
big.
just
Well,
wondering
do
if
you
there are other
think that
things.
you're quick to, like, people in relationships are quick to go after each other because they're like life partners, and so they're doing everything together, and so they're quick to go at each other and be like, oh, you're just doing it wrong, but it's just because they're frustrated or they're going through a stressful time.
I'm not saying that if I'm dating a girl and there's some sort of issue that she can't bring it to me and we can't resolve that in a perfectly amicable way. But, and not all women are guilty of this. Sorry, some motorcycles are going by.
They heard you say that.
Yeah. So, sorry guys. I don't know if you guys can hear the motorcycles. So, what was I saying? Fuck. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
She can bring an issue up and that's fine.
Yeah, she can bring an issue up, but I do think that there are just, and this is more so just avoiding these types of people in general, and certainly there are men that can absolutely upend women's lives too. You just need to be very careful with who you choose to date and associate with. So one of the biggest things I think a woman can bring to the table is peace. So basically just essentially being pleasant. But certainly, like, going into some of those heavier things, I mean, I'd recommend men. And again, I think this is just the bare minimum. It's kind of obvious. It's kind of self-evident. But no alcohol addiction, no drug addiction, no self-deleting ideation.
I
no,
mean, how about some positive things though? Like,
peace is a very positive thing that a woman can
But
bring
not
to.
the
Okay, some other
don'ts,
things.
like more the
I
do's.
want your the first time I meet you, I want your undivided romantic and sexual attention. So a lot of people, the way they move, they're talking to 3 people at the same time, they're sleeping with 2 of them. When I meet a girl, one of the things that you can bring to the table, and in years past, this used to be the bare minimum you can do, but it's actually, I think it's rather rare today for you to meet a girl and she's not talking to other men. She's properly single. She's not sleeping with other dudes. She didn't just hook up with a guy last week and now she's on a date with you. So from the jump, I want your undivided romantic and sexual attention. All
That's
the other
something.
guys, once you meet me, if we go on a first date, afterwards, it should be a wrap.